We're going to be solving by factoring today. The first half of the assignment doesn't make you solve it. It just has you factor. But for the notes, I'm going to go ahead and factor and then solve. So I'm going to do both pieces. To solve it by factoring, you set y equal to 0. And then I want to factor the right side. The first thing you look at is to see if they have the greatest common factor, and they do. So I'm going to factor out a 2 and an x. And then divide each of those by 2 and x, and you're left with x minus 4. And you set each factor equal to 0. So 2x equals 0 if x is 0. 2 times 0 would give you 0. And then this is 0 if x equals 4. 4 minus 4 would equal 0. So those are my two solutions. If you were just factoring it, that would have been your step. On the next one, set y equal to 0. See if they have a greatest common factor, which they do. So I can take out a 3 and a t. Divide each of those by 3 and a t, and you're left with t squared minus 9. I don't have a linear term here like I did in the first example, so I'm not necessarily finished. I need to see if I can go any further. This is 2 terms, and for 2 terms, the first thing you should try is the difference of 2 squares, and it is a difference of 2 squares. So take the square root of each of those. I'm going to go ahead and write the 3t, and that's going to give me a t and a 3. One of them will be plus, and the other one will be minus. So the difference of 2 squares, square root each of those. One's plus, one's minus. And I'll have 3 different solutions. I have t equals 0. So if t is 0, 3t is 0. That is 0 if t is negative 3. And my last factor is 0 if t is positive 3. So I have 3 solutions on this one. Example 3. First thing you try is greatest common factor. It does not have a greatest common factor. And then you're going to look to see if the leading coefficient is 1, which it's not. I have 3 terms. And so the next thing I'll try is see if it's a perfect square trinomial. That's a square. That's not, so I'm out of luck on that one. And then I'll split the middle. That's going to be my last resort on the factoring. So I need it to have a product or multiply to negative 24. And I want it to add to negative 5. So the numbers that do that are negative 8 and positive 3. So I'm going to set y equal to 0. And I'm going to split the negative 5x term. So my 4x squared and my minus 6 are still in the problem. But instead of writing negative 5x, I'm going to write negative 8x and plus 3x. That would still give me that negative 5x, but I'm splitting that middle term. So we're on split the middle if you're looking at your factor sheet. I'm going to go ahead and factor what they have in common. So you make 2 separate groups. This first group has a 4x in common, and I'm left with x minus 2. The second group has a 3 in common, and I'm left with x minus 2. And now each of these groups have an x minus 2 in common. And when I take the x minus 2's away, I'm left with a 4x and a plus 3. And so you set each of your factors equal to 0. This one you can look at. If x is 2, you'll get 0. 4x plus 3, if you want to go ahead and set it equal to 0, you can. So you would subtract 3 and divide by 4. A fast way to do that is to take the opposite of this and divide by that coefficient. because you're always going to have to move that to the other side. So it's going to be the opposite of what you see here. And then you'll have to divide by that 4 out in front. So if you want to just remember opposite of that divided by that, you can save yourself from having to write out all that work. For the next example, make sure you start with greatest common factor, and these do have a greatest common factor. I'm going to set y equal to 0. I can factor out a 3, and then I'm left with x squared minus 4x plus 3. And this has 3 terms, so you could check perfect square. It's not, because that's not a perfect square, but the leading coefficient's 1, so I don't have to split the middle. So I need something that multiplies to 3 and adds to negative 4. And so the numbers are going to be negative 3 and negative 1. The 3 is still out in front. And then I have x minus 3 and x minus 1. If you wanted to, you could divide both sides by 3 and get rid of that 3. This 3 doesn't have a letter by it, so it does not affect my solutions. I only need to look at my 2 factors here. So the first factor, 3 will make that 0, and the second one, 1 will make it 0. On example 5, it does not have a greatest common factor. It has 3 terms, and I like to look at perfect square trinomial. It doesn't have a leading coefficient of 1, so you could split the middle, but this does happen to be a perfect square. This is a square, square root of that is 4x. This is a square, square root of that is 5. And if I multiply that and double it, I would get 40x. And that middle term can be plus this or minus this. So this is a perfect square. So that will factor into 4x and 5. And that's going to be a square. And the middle has a negative here, so this will be a negative. If you want, you could write that out twice too. So 4x minus 5, 4x minus 5. If you split the middle, you get the same answer. Okay, last example. They do have a greatest common factor. Set y equal to 0, and let's factor out the greatest common factor, which is 2. There are 3 terms. It's not a perfect square. Leading coefficient's not 1, so I'm stuck splitting the middle on this one. So I need something that multiplies. 6 times negative 15 is negative 90. And it needs to add to 1. And so that's going to be 10 and negative 9. So when I split the middle on this, the 2's still out in front. That will give me 6x squared plus 10x minus 9x minus 15. So the first and last don't change, and instead of x, I'm splitting that into 10x and minus 9x. Group your first 2 and last 2 together. My first group has a 2 and an x in common, and I'm left with 3x plus 5. My next group, there's a minus in front here. I have to take out the negative, and so then they have a 3 in common as well. So I'm going to take out a negative 3, and that will leave me, divide each of those by negative 3, and that's going to be 3x plus 5. I'm going to go ahead and write over here then. So I have 0 equals 2. Take a 3x plus 5 out of each of those. And when I do that, inside the brackets, I'm left with a 2x and a minus 3. And let's go ahead and use our little trick I showed you earlier. The 2 doesn't have a letter by it, so it has nothing to do with the solutions. I need to look at my factors here. I'm going to take the opposite of this divided by that, so that's going to be negative 5 over 3. And I'm going to take the opposite of this, so that'll be positive 3 divided by 2. And those are my two solutions. You could set 3x plus 5 equal to 0 and 2x minus 3 equal to